Andrej Stojakovic picked a new home in the transfer portal, and folks, it could not be a more perfect fit.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, and you are joining at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, Monday through Friday, even into the off season, all the way from now until the start of that season in November. I want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you all that you can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music, and give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us daily in the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel. Today's episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into an Xbox. No console needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. All right, folks, joined today. Very excited to have Locked On Illini host Sunny Verma on the show to break down the commitment of Andrej Stojakovic out of the transfer portal. And Sunny, about a week ago, there was reported that Stojakovic was visiting Illinois, that he was, going to campus, and it felt like, okay, this is an awesome fit for Coach Underwood. We know he's a very talented player. We know Coach Underwood wants those bigger guards. Like, it felt like a slam dunk to me. And then the visit is over, and then a couple days go by, and we don't hear anything. And typically, you kind of expect, like, okay, if a guy left campus without committing, like, is it over? Like, is he going to go somewhere else? And then he releases his top list. North Carolina is now in the mix. Stanford, the school he initially started his college basketball career at, is in the mix. And I don't know about you, but I started to feel like, okay, well, it seems like Illinois is pretty much out of the picture at this point. And then on Monday, we find out, nope, he's going to Illinois after all. What was the roller coaster like on your end? Was this something where people just, felt like he was coming to Illinois, it just took some extra time, or was there some kind of concern about what was going on the last week?
So it's interesting for me, actually. I heard that Andrej might be a target for us early April. This was before he even entered the transfer portal. I had dropped a little nugget in my Discord saying, hey, keep an eye out on this kid. The staff is interested. Let's wait and see if he enters the transfer portal. And then, obviously, Illinois was hot in the recruitment of BakerMazara, one of the top uncommitted prospects out there. And for months, it looked like he was going to commit to the Illini. And then he had a very good performance playing for Barcelona, his team out in Europe. And he had a very good performance playing the Nike Hoop Summit. And all of a sudden, his price kept shooting up more and more, to the point where Illinois has spent a lot of money retaining a lot of the core players from last year. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But they still had one, quote, bag left for one big major splash. And Brad Underwood at that point started having reservations about whether he wanted to spend that one big bag on a freshman again. As good as Kasparis was last year, as good as Will Riley were last year, it's hard when you're counting on a freshman to be the best player on your basketball team. I mean, they're not Cooper Flag, and neither is BakerMazara. And so I think this year, with the more veteran squad that we have, I think that Brad, knowing that he had these conversations going on with a couple other prospects who were a little older, such as Stojakovic, he decided to kind of pivot, I guess that would be the word. And Dame is going to go somewhere else. And then it was simply a waiting game. And then sure enough, Andrej enters a transfer portal. And usually what's a good sign is when someone enters a transfer portal, everyone already earmarks him for a team. And that's kind of what happened with Stojakovic. It was immediately look at Illinois, look for Illinois. So at the same time, I was getting into conversations with my contacts, and they're like, yeah, we told you. Visit happened. And for everything I know, the visit went fantastic. Apparently, Peja, his dad, and Brad Underwood shared a glass of wine on a patio. I'm talking about, this is graphic novel, perfect type of a comic book story. But as you said, nothing happened. And then 2-3 days later, everyone's asking me, hey, when's it going to happen? I was like, I don't know. So I'm asked to reach out to my contacts. And all of them are telling me, yeah, we're fine. Yeah, we're fine. And it's hard, I'm sure you understand, that everyone who's supposedly in the know says it's fine. But the fan base on the other side is like, if we're fine, why hasn't it happened yet? what is taking so long? And Illinois has a history of being strung along in the past. And so, it is a, dare I say, sensitive fan base. But, the commit was supposed to happen on Thursday. Didn't happen. Then it was supposed to happen on Friday. Didn't happen. Then it's like, hey, maybe over the weekend. Obviously, didn't happen. Then we heard early this week. Then sure enough, Monday game, the news broke. And Illini fans just got to breathe a huge sigh of relief because, this was the guy that Brad has been targeting as his option 1A when it comes to, being the focal point for next year's basketball team.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into kind of what I wanted to talk about in terms of the fit for Stojakovic with Illinois, because obviously, as you mentioned, this Illinois team loses their two freshman guards from last year and kind of needed to make some adjustments in the backcourt. And one of the things that Stojakovic mentioned in some press after the commitment to Illinois that kind of resonated with me is wanting to go into a system that really values bigger guards being kind of the primary ball handler. And we saw that obviously with Jakachonis last year. We've seen that with other players at Illinois in the past where they've kind of had, bigger guards who handle the ball and kind of run the primary point. And Stojakovic has kind of done that. Cal just kind of let him do whatever he wanted with the basketball because they didn't have a ton of other talent around him. And so he goes out, averages 18 points a game and plays great on a not particularly good team. But in a system like Underwood's, if he's got the ball in his hands a lot, I think there's a lot of intrigue about how that could work and specifically the matchup nightmare that's going to be for some of these teams in the Big Ten to have to put, you want to put your best defender on Stojakovic, but if your best defender is 6'2", you're going to be at a disadvantage. So I'm really interested to see how Underwood utilizes him, but also if he's kind of feeling that appeal of, I want to be an on-ball player at my size, and I think this is the program to do it at. I agree with him 100%, and I could see this working incredibly well for Coach Underwood and the Illini.
Yeah, I think that was the sell. You brought up, it started with Ayo Dosunmu a few years back. Illinois, Brad Underwood has kind of built a system for a wing to have the ball and have freedom with the ball and, maximize their skill set. It started with Ayo Dosunmu a couple of years ago, who just now signed his second contract in the NBA. He's going to be a very wealthy man. There's Terrence Shannon Jr. and Marcus Domask just from 2 years ago. Same idea. The 6'6", 6'7", 6'8" type of wing, that'll utilize the offense around their type of skill set. And as you mentioned, Kasparis and Will Riley last year, two kids who came pretty highly heralded, and they lived up to their expectations. Coming into the year, Kasparis was mocked in the 20s for the NBA draft. He should be going in the lottery. Will Riley, I've seen as high as 15, 16 in the upcoming NBA draft. So I think that was kind of the sell. That's what this team was lacking so far. We have pretty quality talent all around everywhere else, but we don't have the alpha, that one Kasparis replacement, that one Will Riley replacement moving forward for next year's team. And that's why, it could have been Dame Sar. It could have been Josh Dix, I think, was also recruited heavily by Illinois. But I think from the beginning, Brad Underwood really eyed Stojakovic for the skill set that he brings, just because, as you said, I think when it comes to playmaking, he's a guy who, averaged 18 points per game last year for a really bad basketball team, where the defenses could almost solely focus on him. Now, when he has guys like Tomislav Ivicic, Kylan Boswell to play off of, also other good playmakers, I really think this could be the best situation for him.
Yeah, and you mentioned the other playmakers, and I think that's such a huge part of this conversation. And that's what I want to kind of get into next, Sunny, is talking about this Illinois roster at large, knowing that it's not complete and we're still very early in the offseason. But Stojakovic comes in as this alpha dog on a team that, already has a lot of returning talent and some very exciting incoming talent. And I want to talk with you about what that's going to look like for this team heading into next season. And we're going to get into that here in just a second. But first, folks, there's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge, and it's electric in the arena. And with Game Time, you can be part of all of that without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. And here's why I use Game Time. Not only do I get to save up to 60% on sporting events, but concerts, comedy shows, theater as well. Plus, Game Time's all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see, that's what you pay. Right now, tickets for game 5, between the Milwaukee Bucks and Indiana Pacers. That game Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Tickets are $41 to get in the door on Game Time. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Well, Sunny, Andrej Stojakovic is not the only transfer portal addition for the Illini. We have a reunion, brotherly love between Timoslav Ivicic and his brother Zvonimir coming to campus. Obviously, Timoslav was a freshman last year, very, very excellent player. Missed some time in the middle of the season, which I think when he was out was kind of a good indication of how impactful he was for that team because they kind of struggled without him. But now they'll have him and his brother Zvonimir, who of course started his career at Kentucky for Coach Calipari, followed Coach Cal to Arkansas, and really showed flashes of excellence, flashes of, dare I say, dominance at times. But I think the key operative word is flashes. We didn't see it very consistently from him. Some of that is that John Calipari is very inconsistent with how he plays his bigs. And we've seen that in the past with other players who have blossomed at different stops. So I think there's some optimism, certainly, that Big Z could kind of unlock something for Coach Underwood. What's kind of your read, or even the fan base's read on bringing in Zvonimir to play with his brother?
One detail you did leave out is, he committed to Cal, but he also committed to Orlando Antigua, the assistant coach at the time at Kentucky, one of the best big man developers in all of college basketball. And, Orlando is now an assistant coach at Illinois. So I do think that connection is something that I'm really looking forward to seeing. Look, Big Z, he's kind of the embodiment of what Brad Underwood looks for. He likes length, and he likes the ability to shoot three-pointers. And Big Z obviously has exactly that. Now, I don't know the plan. I don't know if, supposedly the rumor is they're going to start both the Ivicic brothers at center and 4. And I don't know if I'm a big fan of that because I don't know if either of them is really nimble enough to play against a 4 on defense. But I like the idea that you can get 40 minutes of Ivicic on the floor at the same time. Zvonimir isn't quite the defender his brother is, but he's a better shot blocker, and so it's a good pickup. And I do think that, because he's got more years ahead of him, that just sitting down, working with Orlando can really, and he's got the comfort of his brother, his best friend. Like it was constant throughout the season. There'd be pictures from each school showing one brother watching the other one on TV. So they're obviously, pretty close. So hopefully that whole family connection, along with working with one of the best big men developers in the country, can help Big Z reach his potential.
Well, we talked Stojakovic, we talked Ivicic, we talked the other Ivicic, and if that's not enough, Illinois also bringing in a pair of international freshmen, both from Serbia, 6'9" forward David Mirkovic and 6'3" guard Mahalo Petrovic. Just there's a clear theme on the Illinois roster this upcoming season with those guys with the last name ending in the IC, the international prospects. Obviously, something that we've seen at Illinois in the past and have seen with plenty of success. Obviously, we talked about Kasparas earlier as kind of the most notable recent example. But looking at kind of the roster as it stands right now, I know they got a couple of freshmen from the United States coming in as well. But kind of where do you see these two international guys fitting in for this upcoming season for Coach Underwood?
I really like what Brad Underwood's doing. And I promise and I assure you, I'm not trying to be a homer here.
Oh, you can. It's all good.
Essentially what he's done is he took a look at the landscape and he realized that guys who would cost $500,000, $700,000 last year are now costing $2.2 million in today's market. So what he's kind of done is he's looking for a market inefficiency and going out to Europe. Petrovic is an MVP candidate in the league that he played in. 22 years old. At 22 years old, college basketball players here are graduating. He's going to be coming in. He averaged 14.5 points per game, and I believe a little over 7 assists a game. He's the perfect guy to slide in right next to Kylan Boswell. Kylan Boswell, I think, has all Big Ten potential, but I don't know how much I trust him with the ball in his hands at all times. I don't know. Like one of my biggest question marks coming into the offseason was As good as he was that last month of the season, when Kaspersky went down for an injury and Kylan Boswell was the guy in charge of being the playmaker, the point guard, he did struggle a little bit. And so this, the rumor was actually Illinois was going to be bringing back home Adam Miller. And so Adam would have solved some of those needs, but he's not really a ball handler, playmaker himself. Then out of nowhere, out of the blue, nobody, no insider, nobody had mentioned the name Petrovic, and out of the blue, while Stojakovic is on his visit, by the way, they announced the arrival of Petrovic. And it's a great pickup. It's a guy who, if you watch his game tape, he's very aggressive. He attacks the rim. He's super smart. I hate to use this name as a comparison, but I promise it's genuine. If you watch his YouTube tape, it's very Braden Smith light. He's very confident. He knows where he wants to go, and he feels like he's the best player on the basketball court. You know, kind of the qualities that Braden Smith has. The other gentleman, David Mirkovic, is he plays for the team that the Ivicic used to play for in Europe, and he actually has better numbers than Tomislav had when he was playing out there. He's coming in here, and I think if I was putting the starting lineup together, he would slide in right at 4. He's about 6'9", 240. He can hit the 3, but he performed very well at that Nike Hoop Summit. I think in that first half, he was arguably Team World's best player. He had 8 points, I believe, just in that first quarter alone. He didn't really shoot much beyond that, but you know, I watched that game with a lot of interest for Dame Sar mainly, but also David Mirkovic, who had just committed a couple days earlier. And I came away really impressed with David. And, you know, it's just, I see what Brad's doing, and I just don't know, like talents like that, I think would cost 2x if he found the equivalent here in the United States. And so I'm very excited. It's hard for me because I don't know what it's going to look like on this side of the ocean. But based on pure talent, I'm very excited.
Well, you talked about a little bit earlier, talked about for Illinois to try to retain their talent as well, and that being a key element. I think a lot of teams are kind of fighting with that of like, oh, why hasn't this team landed very many players or anybody in the transfer portal? It's like, well, they kept 5 of their guys, and that wasn't free. You know, it's like it's a challenge that a lot of teams are kind of dealing with. And we look at this Illinois team, and obviously the 2 freshmen are moving on to the NBA, and I think that was expected all along. But you also, you know, Trey White hits the portal, goes to Kansas. Morris Johnson hits the transfer portal, but you keep Kylan Boswell, who, like you mentioned earlier, who has the potential to be a really big-time player. You keep, obviously, Ivicic. You bring in his brother. You got some other newcomers coming in. Ty Rogers coming back. Like, you got some talent on this roster. So kind of looking at how things are right now, kind of what is the expectation for this group? There's a lot of youth. Like you mentioned, we're not even really sure exactly what that starting lineup's going to look like. But especially with Stojakovic coming in now, kind of what does it feel like the excitement level is for this team in what should be another very competitive Big Ten?
You know, I recently did a deep dive on the other Big Ten teams, just, you know, thinking, hey, this can't just be Illinois that, you know, people are panicking and whatnot about. But I looked at the other Big Ten rosters in the conference, and really the only clear-cut leader, in my opinion, is Purdue. Of course, Purdue, I mean, they very well might be the number 1 team coming into the season next year. But behind them, I genuinely put Illinois right in that second tier. I think it's us and UCLA. If Yaxel decides to come back to college, I think you have to put Michigan in that conversation. But Michigan, like, I don't know. I think they downgraded at point guard, and I don't know if they necessarily have the shooting that plays in today's college basketball world. But Andy, I'll tell you, it's odd being an Illinois fan and more in like a Brad Underwood fan. Last year, at this point, on April 28th, 2024, we didn't have Tomislav Ivicic. We didn't have Kaspersky Yakuchonis, nor did we have Will Riley. Tommy committed on May 6th. Kaspersky committed on May 28th, and Will Riley committed on June 23rd. Wow. If you look at our roster this year, it's pretty much done. And so for me, this is kind of surreal that we haven't even hit May yet. And for the most part, I can just kind of put my feet up and relax. Like, the roster looks pretty much set. You know, last year they had to replace 9 guys because everyone had essentially graduated from that Elite 8 team. This year, the way that they were able to keep Tomislav and Kylan, I think those were the 2 really big pieces. I liked Trey White, but if Trey White wants more of an on-the-ball role, I don't think that's what his game will translate to. So good luck in Kansas if that's what he ends up doing.
Mhm.
Morez Johnson was my favorite player on last year's team.
Yeah.
And if you watched the live rapid reaction episode that I recorded when he decided to transfer, you can see some hurt in my eyes. But if we're also being truthful, his freshman year, he's shown he's a really, really good rebounder.
Mhm.
And that's his only elite skill right
Yeah.
now. And so while it hurt because he had been committed to us for so long, I think it hurt more emotionally than it really does losing the basketball player, because he still has some room to develop. And, I do think a guy like David Mirkovic can come in here and maybe even this season be a net positive, because David Mirkovic, I think against kids his own age in the under 19s, he averaged like 23 points, 11 rebounds per game. It showed more of an all-around game than Morez did. But Morez, of course, is a lot more athletic. But, it's just one of those where it comes with being a fan of a Brad Underwood team. You just never know what he has up his sleeve. And so far on April, now that we've landed Andre, and now I know who the alpha on next year's team is, I'm feeling pretty good.
Sunny, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come on the show. We always appreciate the expertise of the local experts. So I appreciate chance to talk about Stojakovic and the rest of the itches on this Illinois team, and looking forward to what should be another fun year for Coach Underwood and the Illini.
Thank you for your time, Eddie.
Thanks to Sunny for joining. We're going to stay in the Big Ten, talk about Chad Baker-Mazara founding his next home, joining Eric Musselman and the USC Trojans. We're going to talk about what that means for USC coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if that bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting super easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into their player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Speaking of those Illini, plus 3,500 to win the national championship. If you're feeling real good about Brad Underwood's team with the addition of Stojakovic, might be worth tossing some dollars down. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, no longer joined by Sunny Verma of Locked On Illini, but we are still talking about the Big Ten, another big-time transfer portal commitment that happened on Monday. Stojakovic was one of the big ones, and then Chad Baker-Mazara to USC. We also had Cedric Coward commit to Duke right before we went live on this show, so we'll have Isaac and Leaf. We'll talk about that one later in the week. That's a big move for the Blue Devils, but want to talk about the off-traveled Chad Baker-Mazara, who started his career at a junior college level and then started his Division I college basketball career at Duquesne as a 20-year-old during the COVID 2020-21 season. If you can think back and remember the year that Baylor beat Gonzaga in the national championship game, that was Chad Baker-Mazara's freshman year, and he was already 20 years old. He spent 1 year at Duquesne in the A-10, transferred to San Diego State, and spent his second season with the Aztecs in 21-22, sat out the 2022-23 season and transferred to Auburn, where he spent the 23-24 and most recently the 24-25 seasons. It was a bit surprising to see Chad Baker-Mazara enter the transfer portal after this year. Most thought he would either stay at Auburn or begin a professional career, because partway through this upcoming season, Chad Baker-Mazara is going to turn 26 years old. He will start the season as a 25-year-old. We use him as an example because he's a notable player, and obviously he was in the news and had a lot of attention around him, in part because of how good Auburn was, in part because he makes headlines for himself. But there's a lot of age discrepancy in college basketball these days. 18-year-olds competing against 23, 24, 25-year-olds. Like, it's a thing that's happening more and more, even with the COVID era more or less dying out, obviously not completely, as we're talking about Baker-Mazara here, but just a crazy thing that we have a player at this age still with eligibility to continue to play at the college basketball level. Baker-Mazara last year for Auburn, about 12 points, 3 boards, a little under 3 assists per game. Fantastic three-point shooter, 38% on just over 4 attempts per game. I think he was like 41% in his other season at Auburn. So he's a consistently very good three-point shooter, especially in a very difficult SEC. He's an elite free throw shooter, 88.5% last year. He was 89% the year before that. He's excellent at the line. He's a good scorer. He's a decent passer. He's long. He's versatile as a wing. Like, there's a lot of really good things that Chad Baker-Mazara brings to your team. He also has a bit of a reputation for his attitude, for his talking on the floor, for technical fouls, for various other things. And I think that's what made him moving away from Auburn a little bit odd, because it felt like Baker-Mazara and Bruce Pearl sort of had an understanding, like they kind of had a rapport. Like, it felt like Pearl was kind of the right coach to work with Baker-Mazara and kind of keep him in check and everything that he needed to find the success that he found at Auburn. It's not like he wasn't successful at his previous stops, but he really thrived at Auburn. And I think a lot of that had to do with Coach Pearl, but he put himself out there. He found himself a landing spot at USC under Coach Eric Musselman, who's also pretty fiery, who's also kind of an intense guy. I'm really interested to see how Chad Baker-Mazara and Eric Musselman get along, how this relationship works. Are there going to be fireworks? Is it going to be super symbiotic and work fantastic for both sides? Is it going to blow up in somebody's face? I don't really know, but it feels like it could kind of go one of those directions. And so I think that's going to make this extra interesting. And it's, once again, for Coach Musselman, he started last year at USC, and obviously anytime a new coach takes over a program, you expect to have to rebuild the roster, especially in the NIL and the transfer portal era. But last year he brought in, I think, 11 transfers, had the most points per game of any transfer portal class in college basketball. But he's doing the same thing again. He's got to rebuild basically from scratch. A lot of those players that he brought in last year were seniors, so a lot of them just are out of eligibility. That includes Chibuzo Agbo from Boise State, who spent his last year at USC, Josh Cohen, Clark Slatchert, Matt Noling, Terrence Williams, Bryce Pope, all of them out of eligibility after this year. But outside of that, USC also loses a huge chunk of their roster to the transfer portal. Wesley Yates, who came on just absolutely on fire during the Big Ten regular season, averaged 18 a game. Once the calendar flipped to January, shot 40% from three, or like over 40% from three. He hit the transfer portal, went back to UW. Desmond Claude is in the transfer portal, perhaps the one of maybe even the most sought after player not named PJ Haggerty right now in the portal. Rashawn Agee's in the portal. St. Thomas is in the portal. He's also out of eligibility, just kind of hoping for a miracle to get another year there. Kevin Patton and his brother Kalai Patton both transferred to New Mexico in the portal. Jalen Shelley's gone. Isaiah Elahim, who was a highly regarded freshman, didn't play much for them and now is transferred to FAU. That's a ton of losses between the graduations and the transfer portal guys. 14 players who were on USC's roster last year are not returning. That's it. That's pretty much your entire roster right there. So once again, Eric Musselman rebuilding from scratch. Chad Baker-Mazara, a great, I was going to say place to start, but he's actually their 7th new addition out of the transfer portal specifically. Would have been 8th, except that one of the additions, Cal State Northridge's Keontae Jones, has decided to re-enter the transfer portal after the addition of Chad Baker-Mazara. I get it. Keontae Jones, 6'6", plays the same position, was 13 points per game and shot well from three last year. But if you're going to get a guy who averaged about 13 points a game and shot well from three, you'd rather have the guy who did it at Auburn than the guy who did it at CSUN, with all due respect to the Big West. So Jones hits the portal, should land on his feet somewhere very soon. But I'm really interested kind of what this roster breakdown is going to look like for Coach Musselman and USC, because we have Rodney Rice coming in from Maryland, part of that Crab 5 starting lineup. Rice is 6'4" guard, averaged 14 points, shot over 37% from three. You have Jacob Kofi from Virginia, who's kind of a 6'10", small ball 5, maybe power forward type from Virginia, 7 points, 4.5 boards, a decent shooter as well. Jaden Brownell comes over from Samford, 14 points, 40% from three. Amarion Dickerson from Robert Morris, 13 points, 5 boards, 2 blocks. He's a big. Ezra Asar from Utah, 12.5 points, very effective low scorer inside the arc. And then Gabe Dines from Youngstown State, 7 points, but over 3 blocks per game for Dines. He's 7'3", and if you're 7'3" in the Horizon League, frankly, you should be blocking 3 shots a game. So I'm glad that he put up those numbers, and it's some size, which was much needed for Musselman last year. Their big issue in the Big Ten was they just did not have really intrigued how it's going to all come together. There's not kind of an obvious point guard on this roster at this point. Claude was their guy last year, of course, now in the portal. So is Rodney Rice going to handle the ball a lot? Does that fall on one of the incoming freshmen? Does that fall on Elijah Arenas, Gilbert Arenas' son, 6'6" guard, who's the number 10 ranked player in the recruiting class, which for those who've been following the story, the latest on Elijah Arenas, who was in a very scary car accident last week and was briefly put in a medically induced coma. He seems to be doing great from all accounts. He's moving, he's talking, he should be released from the hospital soon. So that's incredible news for the entire Arenas family. I want to make sure we include that in this conversation instead of just talking about the basketball side of things, but certainly a player that, assuming he is healthy enough to start the season, is going to be a huge part of this roster. They also have Jerry Easter as their other incoming freshman, 4-star guard, 46th ranked player in the class at 6'3". But yeah, I think right now, I'm just interested in what Muss is going to do with the talent that he has, because last year they had a lot of talent. It took him a long time to gel. I'm not sure they ever really did gel. I'm not sure he knew what he had in Wesley Yates until later in the season, and they never were particularly competitive in the Big Ten. This year's team, I think, has more talent at the top. Kofi, Rice, BakerMazara, and Arenas by itself is a tremendous group, and I think Asar and some of the others are really going to be big-time contributors. But it's hard to, there's not a lot of proof that you can win a lot of games with a completely new look roster. Kentucky obviously had a good year last year, so did Louisville, but they didn't win championships. They certainly didn't advance that far. So I'm interested to see if Muss's strategy here of kind of rebuilding, tearing it down to the studs and rebuilding year after year, how long that people will put up with that at USC, and also just how long it'll take for that to really work and for this team to break through and finish top 5, top 10 at least in the Big Ten. Because I think right now I'm not super sold on this roster yet, but there's still work to be done. And certainly Chad Baker-Mazara is a good place to continue going for this USC squad. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Again, a special shout out to those everyday listeners, those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the Mick Bruins. And until next time, peace out.